Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most intelligent, dynamic, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more info, or you can email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Jean Archambault-White. We'll be discussing her book, Eloise of Westhaven, Not Just a Kid, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble at the end of this month. So make sure that you're getting the versions that have been released in 2020. So one more time, that's Eloise of Westhaven, Not Just a Kid. And I will say, Jean was brought to People of Distinction today by some of the best movers in the business, Parchment Global Publishing. You can find them at parchmentglobalpublishing.com. It is an absolute delight and such a pleasure to have Jean here on the line because we're going to be talking about a number of books that she's written, but the anchor for today's interview is Eloise of Westhaven, Not Just a Kid. And I love the fact that we have Jean here on the line to discuss this book. Jean, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
Thank you for the invitation. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am fantastic, Jean. Thank you very much. I'm honored and humbled by having you as a guest. We're very much looking forward to this. Now, before we jump into the book, let's hold off slightly. Tell our listening audience a little bit more about yourself.
I am a great grandma that has retired to Florida after living in a lot of different places in the U.S. just because my husband and I are by nature a little nomadic. And so we started out in Minnesota, moved to Arizona, moved to Texas, then to Michigan, then to North Carolina, and finally landed in Florida, which to me is a dream. So, that's how I got where I am. And when I came to Florida, I found myself at odds as to what to do with myself and fell to writing books. I've been writing and have been published since I was 15 years old, and have worked in various areas of literature, not just as a writer, but as an editor and a mentor to other writers. I was born and raised in Northeast Minneapolis in what we learned was a French family, but now as I'm older, I find out I'm only partial French, and I'm in fact half Irish, and also a few drops of Native American. And I came from a great big family, 6 kids. I was second oldest. And among all of these people, I was the square peg. I just didn't fit with them. They were boisterous and busy, and I was a loner and very quiet. So I spent a lot of time by myself, drawing and scribbling and playing piano and just trying to pull myself together and find my own way of engaging in the world. So when I came to writing books, the words just flowed. I think in words. I wake up thinking in words. I think whole stories and then sit down and they just come straight out of me. It's something I was born with. I never learned it. I was never trained to do this. As a matter of fact, I went to college when I was 17 and made the very adolescent choice to skip college because all I wanted to do was write. And the professors were using my material as examples of fine writing. So I said, what do I need this for? I'm just going to go write. So I started out walking into a newspaper office in Denton, Texas, and telling the editor, I just want to write. He said, fine, write me a column. What do you know? I said, I know plants. He said, okay, have your column on my desk Tuesday. And that began my professional writing career. And I wrote a little column called Living with Green Things. Moved from there to Minnesota, and from there to Michigan. In Michigan, I wrote for a small paper I wrote a column called Women's World, just talking about the way I lived, and we lived on a little farm there, and talked about how it was important for women to take things in hand and take care of things themselves and not wait for someone else to do it for them. So I think my favorite thing that I did as a writer was to be an editor for technical writers. I worked for a company that wrote software for security systems, and the biggest project I worked with was from 5 different authors in 3 different countries, and I had to make this huge document have one voice. That's what an editor does, make one voice overall. And I was given such kudos, and it was so important to me that I worked on such a great project and that they trusted me with their work. So at that same time, I started penning children's books. One of them is Lazy Legs. Another one is The Truth About Fairies. And it's about a little girl's journey trying to learn about fairies. And she learns from her friend Allison Elizabeth. And Allison Elizabeth tells her all about fairies. And she goes, trying to find out things from her parents, from the old man next door. And they're all, don't bother me, child. Don't bother me, child. So she finally goes to sleep one night, and she has a dream about where the fairies live. They let her slide on the rainbow. They let her help teach the baby birds to sing. They let her help paint the flowers, because that's what fairies do. And she ends the story by saying, if you want to know about fairies, you can ask Allison Elizabeth, or you can just ask me. My second favorite children's book is Lazy Legs, which is a saga of a boy that was so lazy he would not get out of bed. He just stayed in there all the time, and it begins, Lazy Legs lived way out past the school, around by the church and down near the pool. And it takes him on an odyssey of just laying in his room and eating, and his mother's trying to get him out. And all the good children all down the block were out of their beds by 7 o'clock. They'd eat up their breakfast and run down the street, down to the corner where they'd all meet. They'd all ride together on the big yellow bus and go off to school without any fuss. But Lazy Legs doesn't do that. He just stays in his room. And finally what happens is he becomes so fat, and his room is such a mess, that they call the ambulance, call the police, call the neighbors, call their niece. And they all work together, and they get him out, and they put him on a train and take him across the country to live with his Grandpa Lee. And finally, at the end, now he rises at 7 o'clock and runs up the hill and down the block, joins all the children on the corner and gets on the bus with them and rides off to school without any fuss. But they don't call him Lazy Legs anymore. They just call him Larry. And people say, why Larry? It's because that's his name. It's obvious. It's his name. So these things just come out of me, all of a piece. This lazy legs, I woke up. My husband and I were going out of town for a short vacation. I woke up laughing with these words coming out of me and ran in and sat down at my computer and started typing as fast as I could so I wouldn't forget anything. And that began my odyssey of children's books, of which I have many, and those will be released next year. And there'll be different volumes. There'll be one big picture book, like the one our mother used to read to us from on Sunday nights. We would have popcorn and she'd talk to us and read this big book to us. And I wanted a book like that for mothers to read to their children. But there's also picture books of different levels for beginning readers, and then I go into chapter books. And then finally, I went into Eloise of Westhaven, and it started out as a novelette. And it came from a dream. I dreamt about this girl running and crying and yelling for help, and her mother had died, and she had lost absolutely everything. This is in the pioneer days in the 1850s, and she lived on a farm with her parents and siblings, and everybody one by one died, and she was left completely alone, and she knew nothing except the farm. So she ended up being adopted by the town's store owner, the Cravits family, and they take her in and adopt her as their own when she's a young lady of 17. Mm-hmm. And she tells them she wants to find her own purpose in life. She doesn't want to just work in the store because they want to help her. She wants to find her own way. And finally, what she does is she gets a job as a governess to the mayor's very difficult children. And of course, she befriends them. She's a stupendous storyteller and wins them over with stories. And her storytelling comes into play at the climax of the book, where there is a bank robbery about to happen. And so she quickly makes up stories about why she's there. And when I write, the speech comes out so picturesque. I mean, the guy that heard her listening in didn't kick the door open. The door flew open at the thrust of a boot. And I love playing with words. I love the way they come out. My favorite authors are A. Milne. The first book was When We Were Very Young. Second one is Now We Are Six. And, of course, another favorite children's author has got to be Dr. Seuss.
Absolutely.
And, yeah, absolutely. And the only thing that's ever really held me back was that I've not ever been in the best of health. So that's kept me from doing all the things I wanted to do. I did, however, have the pleasure of being the creative director at our church for 12 years, and I was in charge of decor for the stage for seasonal things, and I was also in charge of the drama team and wrote, directed, produced, trained actors, and just had a wonderful time with that and did that for 12 years. And then we moved to Florida, and we meant for me to ride in the truck with my husband, but I wasn't well enough. I got sick. So he brought me home, and as I was riding in the truck one day, writing in my journal, as was my habit every day, a little voice inside of me said, this could very well be a book. And that was when my first book, Simple Faith, came out. And it was just my journey in faith from who I was to who I became because of God.
You know, Jean, listen, first and foremost, I have to just thank you. I mean, you're making my job so easy, okay? Because we had a list full of questions that we wanted to get into, and you are so passionate about what you're discussing. You answered the majority of the questions that I wanted to ask before I even had to ask. So thank you for all of that. Jean, the last question that I feel is really the most fitting to end such a magnificent interview. You know, you're talking about your love of writing, right? And how it's really not something you ever had to work for. It's really something that was just instilled within you. And that's beautiful to hear.
Exactly.
And listen, you have your own, you've been, as I've stated earlier in the interview, guys, listen, this is not the only book, right? Eloise of Westhaven first is a series of books. So we were just discussing Not Just a Kid. There's a sequel coming out to this called Eloise of Westhaven, Patience and Progress, as well as the two previous books that Jean has written, Simple Faith and Lazy Legs. Now, Jean, I love having this platform, being an artist myself, and I'm in a different medium, of course, but being an artist myself, I love having this platform to be able to pay it forward to other artists that are out there. You've written multiple books. You've published your books. You've been writing all your life. I mean, this is something that you know through and through. It's like the back of your hand. What advice could you offer a new writer, somebody just starting out?
I would say, as I have said to many different authors, just write. Mm-hmm. If you want to write, just write. And then if you want to publish, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to pay for it, at least until you get known. But if you want to write, just write and let your words flow and go back and play with them, rearrange them, change them, get your thesaurus out and see if there's a better way to say what you've been saying. And that's how I teach other writers to write. I just tell them to keep looking at what they've written and see if it could be written stronger or more poetic or anything like that, you know.
You know, Jean, thank you so much for sharing that. And listen, I love it, right? Plain and simply put, there's nothing to it but to do it, right? You just got to get out there, put the pen to the page. And listen, just because you've written it down doesn't mean you can't go back and change it later on. But by holding yourself up is actually going to make the process a lot harder. So when you have these ideas, when you have things that come to mind, don't judge it. Just put it out on the page. Just write. You can worry about organizing and going through and altering things later on. Just get the pen to the page. I think that's wonderful. That's fantastic advice.
I think when you were saying about just put the pen to the paper and not worry about it, you can always change it. That's what happened to my two novels. They came out on the market, and I said, now, wait a minute. This end could have been stronger if I did it this way. And the same with volume 2. They're both in second edition now because there were just things that I thought could have been stronger, that I could have put more history and sociology into it, because the 1850s were really an exciting time. It was an end to slavery. The railroad was almost completed. Native Americans were in great unrest because their land had been taken from them and parceled out into little things. And, you know, there's just so much happening that I wanted to put that in the book too. And so I became not only a student of history, but of sociology at the same time.
Guys, one last time, here on the line with Jean Archambault-White. We just finished discussing all of her books. We went into briefly Eloise of Westhaven, Not Just a Kid. We talked about the sequel, Eloise of Westhaven, Patience and Progress. We also discussed Simple Faith and Lazy Legs, all of which will be available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble by the end of this month. So continue to check back in to get your latest edition, the 2020 version, when they're available. Jean, this has been absolutely phenomenal. Such a delight having you as a guest on People of Distinction. Thank you very much.
And it's been such a good time for me. I've really appreciated it and enjoyed it so much. Thank you for having me.